All right. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's three Prakim Rambam, Kilchois, Chametz, Umatzah, chapters 5, 6, and 7, Prakim Hey, Vav, and Zayin, beginning with Perek Chamishi. And we will learn now about how does food become Chametz. We keep on learning about you can't have Chametz, you can't have exactly what is Chametz, how does something become Chametz, what is that which becomes Chametz, and a little bit of the dinim of kashering utensils, which means that there are times that the chametz or the taste of the chametz gets absorbed in a utensil, and certain kalim are kasherable, and we'll learn exactly how to do it, and certain kalim are not kasherable, and therefore they may not be used for Pesach, as we will see. Perek Chamishi has 26 halachas, beginning with halacha Aleph. Says that Rambam ain't also mishum chametz b'Pesach. Elo chameshes minei hadogen bolvad. What exactly could become chametz? Only a product which is made from the 5 types of grain, and vehein shnei minei hachitim. Really, the 5 all begins with 2 types, and then you have subtypes, and that is chita, wheat, and kusemes and spelt. As we learned already before by Hilchos Brachas, that kusemes is a subcategory. The spelt is a subcategory of wheat. And 3 types of barley, which is barley, shaboy l'shul are oats, and shifine, which is rye. Abel, however, hakitniyois, any types of legumes. They're going, for example, oitis rice, doichen is millet, pulin is beans, adosham are lentils. V'chayoytze bahen ein bahen mishum chametz. They never become chametz. Even if a person is going to need a rice flour bread, and you're going to need it with hot water, and as we'll see, that hot water will make any one of the 5 grains or flour from any one of the 5 grains, hot water, become chametz very quickly. And on top of that, you cover it with clothing. Covering doughs with clothing also normally will make the dough rise, and you have this rice dough, and it was made with hot water, and it's inflated. Nispach means it's bloated, it rises. It mamish looks like a dough that became chametz. Says the Rambam, you can eat it, because if it's not from the 5 grains, if you made it, for example, from rice, this is not chametz that the Torah prohibited to consume, to have hana over Pesach. Elo sirchoin. Sirchoin means it's the flours decaying that creates this types of rising or inflating of the dough, and not leavening. Fact. Halacha 5. Chamishas mini dagan elu, the 5 types of grain. Another rule. 5 grains, but im washer b'mei peiros bilvad, if they were needed with only fruit juice, beloy shem mayim ba'olam, without any water, not even a drop. That's key. Eino boim l'dei chimutz, they will never become leavened. Here also, el afilu hinichem kol hayom, even if you leave them the whole day, and here again at some point they'll become to ache nispach, they'll become to rise, they'll begin to rise. The dough rose. Harei ze mutar b'achila. You're allowed to eat it over Pesach. There's a cloud that fruit juice does not cause the leavening, does not cause the bread or the dough to become leavened. And again, it does cause the flour to decay, which is why everything looks like it's inflated, but it's not chametz. Let's give examples of fruit juice, wine, chalav milk, dvash honey, vizayis means oil, or juices from an olive, it's better. Umei tapuchin, apple juice, meidemayim, pomegranate juice, and any other type of mishari yeinois ushmanam, similar types of wines and oils, and any other type of beverage, if it's directly from a fruit without any water. For who, again, that Rambam emphasizes, because even if only a drop of mayim kolshu who got mixed in a lot of fruit juice, it will have the power to create chametz if it's going to be mixed with any one with the flour of the 5 grains. Arei elo machmitzim. Halacha gimel. Ein mevashlen chitim b'mayim. On Pesach, one should not cook wheat in water. L'mashal kigayin harifos, some sort of cracked wheat. V'loy kemach nor flour kigayin levivois, like dough balls. You have to know all these types of foods that people used to make, that many people might make today. And if you did make such a cooking, that's chametz gamor. This applies only if the kernels crack open within the dish. So this is the rule, my friends. Kernels, Yaron, if they are not cracked, even though they're cooked, and normally they will crack, midday raiso does not become chametz. But any kernel of the 5 grains that has even a slight crack in it, and you cook it with water, that becomes chametz midday raiso. You may not fry dough in oil on a machbas, on a frying pan. But you could cook bread. Bread meaning matzah. We're speaking about Pesach, calling it bread because it's bread. Or roasted flour. In other words, once matzah is already properly made, even only flour, if flour was properly roasted, from that point on, mixing it with water cannot make it into chametz. Which is an example of why I'm not talking about we who are machmir not to have gibraks, but people take matzah mel, api halacha. You know, once you make the matzah back into flour, by the letter of the law, you can make anything out of it. But and if you cook the water up very hot, and then you threw into it kemach, you threw into it flour. So then, it's also going to be permitted, even if the flour was not roasted. You don't have flour and water, because once flour is cooked, it doesn't turn into chametz. Like we said, once the flour is roasted, it doesn't turn into chametz. If the water is very hot, it gets cooked or roasted so quick prior to it becoming chametz. But the water has to be very hot for that. Now, how do you know what very hot means? That's why people don't do it. Because it gets cooked before it becomes chametz. However, the Rambam writes, but the minik b'shinar is bubble. That in Spain and in the entire Western world, the then Western world, before they even knew of this Western world, not to do it. Because the water is not very, very hot, then it might become chametz prior to it becoming a finished product. Prior to it becoming good. Halacha 4. You are allowed to cook grain or to cook flour in fruit juice. Like we said, fruit juice never causes chametz. Similarly, a dough that was kneaded with only mei peiros, with only fruit juice, or if it was cooked b'mei peiros, or if it was fried only with oil on a frying pan, that is a mutter. Again, because of the rule, shemei peiros eina machmitzim. Fruit juice does not cause leavening. Halacha 5. Caramel is roasted grain. Ara caramel, caramel with a kaf. Roasted grain, that first is singed in fire. And only then do you grind it into flour. If that process would have been done properly, so once something is roasted or cooked, from then on it cannot become chametz. And many people did that for taste reasons. They would roast grain. That's called caramel. Then they would make it into flour. Theoretically, you can make cakes out of it. The reason why you can't do it is because we are afraid that it wasn't roasted properly. One part wasn't fully roasted. And that part now with water will become chametz. Even 1 grain. That's the thing we learned yesterday, that chametz is the minimum amount and it's not nullified. Wow. And now when you prepare new pots, just to know, when preparing new pots, people then, to make the pots themselves stronger, they would cook it once with water and flour. That was a technique to strengthen the pot. So when you do that, don't cook, don't use flour and water. But if you have matzah that was already baked, we're saying, if it was stuck and now you made it into flour again, that you could use. That's called matzah shurei. We're machmir now, but by the letter of the law, that's the key. Once the flour of the 5 grains were cooked, were fried, were roasted, even only the flour. Certainly the bread cannot become chametz if everything in their taka became roasted. Avol kemach kolim, but roasted flour, we are afraid. Don't use roasted flour, even though theoretically roasted flour, like we mentioned, cannot become chametz. Shema loy kalu yafa. Maybe one part of the flour wasn't properly roasted. It's hard to roast all of it. The yavel lechinutz halacha vav. Ein boilulin esasu edem b'mayim b'pesach. You may not steer barley in water. Why would they steer barley in water? Because they would want to remove the husks. Because what nowadays we say, oh, it's whole grains, it's so healthy, it's filled with bran. In the times of Chazal, it was considered animal food. The more of the klipa you remove, the healthier it was. I think that the reason why nowadays really changed, we changed. In other words, the more husks we eat, the healthier it is. Husk is klipa. I think the less holy people are, I'm also klipa. Klipa. I think when people were holier, they needed to eat purer foods. I really think that way. But anyways, you can't do that. We're not talking about you can't steer the barley in water. Now, hold on. Everyone knows that if you would leave it soaked, it will become chametz. People did it quick. People would say, no, it takes 18 minutes. It takes time for it to become chametz. Don't do it. The pnei sheim often, because barley kernels are softer in relative to wheat kernels. Umachmitzim b'meheira, and they will become chametz quickly. No, indeed, the imbalol, if you did mix it, you stirred it in water. So imrafu, so then take a look at what is, if it's so soft, how soft. That if you place it on the opening of a roasting pan on which you're baking loaves, they will burst open. Something is very soft when it's supposed to heat it, like bursts open, then it's awesome. Because the very fact that it's that soft, it became chametz quick. But if the barley kernels were not that soft, then it's okay. Don't do it, but it's okay. Now, in contrast, halacha 7, wheat, you can steer them with water. Here the Rambam writes why they did it clearly. To take off the bran. It was a quick thing. You put it to water and you just washed off the dirt. And then you grind it right away, the way you grind anything else into flour. However, Eretz Hatzvi is the land of Israel. Not to do it. Because it's only okay if you do it quickly. And if you come to the baking of it quickly. Because you might forget it in the water. And if you're going to leave kernels, my friends, of wheat in water, the kernels, if they are cracked, biblically they become chametz. Halacha tav shoshan is bashal. If you cook the dish, and you have to discover in it the dish, oh my God, there's kernels of wheat or barley. So if the grains cracked open, like I said, cracked grains in water becomes chametz midoraisa. Even though you didn't make it into flour, then everything is also because it's mixed with chametz. And also, like we learned before, that chametz, unlike all the other prohibitions, unlike all the other prohibited foods that do become nullified by a certain ratio, chametz on Pesach never becomes nullified. The imlain is baku, but if the kernels did not crack, so the kernels themselves should be burned. Midrabana, take them out and burn them. But the rest of the food is good. Now again, we don't even have a kernel that got mixed with water, even though it's not cracked. But that's only rabbinically. So that little kernel that's only problematic rabbinically cannot make the whole thing prohibited. So therefore, removing it is enough. We got to get moving. Halacha 9. Now, since the Torah says is guard the matzah, that means that we should be careful when we make a matzah and guard it, that it should not become chametz at all. And by the way, that's the source of us not allowing a kernel to soak in water, even if it's not cracked. Why are we so machmer? Because the Torah says guard it. But since if it would be cracked, it becomes chametz midoraisa. So when God says be careful, what does God mean by be careful? Not don't do that which is prohibited. Don't even get near doing that which is prohibited. Lefikach os amru chachamim that tzarich adam lizar b'dagin. A person should be careful with the grain that you eat on Pesach. Kedei shelo yovel of mayim, for water not to go in it after it was harvested. That's called matzah shmura. You know what shmura doesn't mean handmade matzah. Shmura means that it was guarded from becoming wet after it was harvested. When it's connected to the ground, it can get wet. It doesn't become chametz. But from when you harvested the grain, no water should ever touch it. Now, grain that got sunken in a river, which can happen, or water fell on it. And as we learned, if it's cracked, it becomes chametz midaraisa. If it doesn't crack, it's problematic midarabana. What should you do with it? Just like you cannot eat it, you cannot own it. So what should you do with it? Make sure it's consumed before Pesach. So what do? I will sell it to other Yidden. And he lets them know that this is something, you can't say that it's chametz. You say this is grain that got wet. Make sure you finish eating it before Pesach. If you want to sell it to a guy before a Pesach, don't sell a large bark to a guy, a large bulk, because you don't know who the guy is going to resell it to. Sell a little bit. Sell it in a way where it's going to get eaten up before Pesach. If you're going to sell him a whole container, he's going to have to resell it. Like another rule. All of Delef, if you have grain and upon which water, let's say water that's leaking from a roof, is constantly dripping on it, and we just said that grain that has water on it, if it's cracked, it becomes chametz midoraisa. If it's not cracked, it's a chametz midrabana. That's only if the water stayed on it. If the water is constantly knocking on it, it never becomes chametz. Any mixture of grain of the 5 flours and water that's constantly being moved does not become chametz. Chametz happens when you leave it be. Think about us, when we're trying to better ourselves, when we're moving. A person is in everything in business. You're moving, you're turning, you're doing, you're good. Stopping is the danger. Calls manchu who toired. As long as the toilet means it's being bothered by the drops. Even if the whole day, even if it's cracked, if it stops, it doesn't become chametz in 1 second. So how long does it take for it to become chametz? Here we go. 2 things. Not yet. If it stays resting like the shiur that we'll learn soon, then that is also okay. Halacha yudal. Don't need a large dough. Don't need a large dough. Because again, as long as you're kneading a dough, it never becomes chametz. Even though today they rush everything. If you're kneading it, it doesn't become chametz. It's very large, you might leave a part to rest. How much are you doing one time? The amount of dough from which you're obligated to remove challah, which is something between 2.5 to 5 pounds. That's okay to make it in one dough. The ein lashon don't need. When you do need, even that amount. Today, no one does this on Pesach. In those days, they would mamish take flour and water and make food on Pesach to just make sure that it becomes chametz. Don't need it, not with hot water. See, hot water makes the process of something becoming chametz speed up. Not in very hot water. Not even in water that was taken out of the well today. We don't do that. Only b'mayim shalanu, water that rested. That means that you took it out of the well yesterday and you let it rest. That's what we do today. All the water is used is water that's sitting overnight. And if you use any of the above waters, then the bread is going to be prohibited. Another rule, just pointing out that even though there is a zman, which we didn't speak about, how long does it take for it to become chametz, certain other circumstances can make that time much smaller. So hot water, or if you're baking, you're kneading under the sun. Halacha 12. A woman should not sit under the sun and knead. It's not sunny, it's cloudy. No. The sun pierces through the clouds. You don't know it. Only in a place that the sun is not shining at all. And when you're kneading a dough, we're speaking about on Pesach. Don't leave the dough and go do something else. Don't leave it to be. I'm going just 2 minutes. Don't do that. So if the same person that's kneading is the same person that's doing the baking, then people in the process would always wash their hands in water, and the hands would heat up the water, and hot water will make dough become chametz quicker. So that person should use 2 utensils of water. One which is used to smooth the matzah, You stick your hands in your water and you put water on it to smooth it. The echad shemitzerenes v'yad, and the other to cool her hands off. Now the im aver v'lasha tachas hashemesh, if she did knead the dough under the sun, or shaloitzinin yada, she never cooled off her hands, so her hands became hot. So the heat of the hands can speed up the process of chimutz. Or if she made a dough that's larger than the sheet of a challah, post facto here, we say the bread is still okay. Finally, how much is the sheet of challah? So we spoke about pounds, and there's a taka machloikis, how much between 2.5 and 5. But in halachic terms, it's 43 eggs. It's 43 and a bit. It's 43 eggs. And when we speak about eggs, we're speaking about not the weight of the eggs, but the volume, the size of the eggs. Now, let's go back to the time. Okay, you're not using hot water. You're not doing it in the sun. Nowadays, no one does this on Pesach, but when we make matzah before Pesach. So like this, as long as the person is oisek babatsek, as long as you're busying yourself kneading the dough, even if it's taking you the whole day, that's the klal. But for imik b'ayada, if you lifted your hands and you let the dough sit. So here we go. If it rises to the extent that if you hit on the dough with one hand, a noise will resound because there's like a little bit of a hollow inside of it. That's called chametz. And you have to burn it right away. If when you're hitting it, it doesn't give such a resounding sound, so now there's another thing you have to see. Did you let it be the amount it takes for a man to walk 1 mil? And in halacha, there's a whole machlokes. How long is it? Or machmer, 18 minutes. That's the 18 minutes. It means even though it didn't rise to the point that when you're hitting it, you hear a sound. Parichmetz and v'yisaraf miyat, you have to burn it immediately. Now, 2 other simanim, which are not biblically problematic, but they are so rabbinically. If the color, if the surface of the dough became wrinkled, like when there's a person who, because of awe, fear, or another type of emotional reaction, sometimes the hairs on the person's skin stands. And we're not looking at the standing hair, we're looking at the change in the skin. It becomes a bit wrinkled. If that is what the dough appears like, it's also prohibited to eat it. But we can't say that that's chametz midoraisa. But the first 2 simanim, which is either if you hit it, if there's a certain type of echo that comes in, or if you waited the 18 minutes, that's chametz midoraisa. Halacha 14, if you were kneading 2 doughs together and you let them both be, and one of them reached the level, and now they both, you let them be for the same amount of time. You hit one of them and it made the sound. This sound, that's not good. They are both prohibited, even though the other does not making this resounding sound, because it's a siman and not a siba. Shteim yisrefu, and that's chametz gomer. Halacha tezvav ein oisem sirikin hamitziyorim haPesach. Don't make thick loaves with designs. Any type of sophisticated, elaborate type of dough is something that normally you need more time to make. We're trying to avoid the making of bread on Pesach or matzahs before Pesach to be done in a way where it takes a long time to make it, because it might end up becoming chametz. A woman will take her time. And during that time and during the stops and the pauses, and it becomes chametz while she's making it. Now, that's only problematic when you have a home person making it. See, I'm already programmed. I can't say a home woman, a home person. But a baker, professional, they know how to make everything quicker. A baker can do it. Why? Because they're good, they know what they're doing, and they know how to do it quickly. But balabatem asurim. And a balabas is also afilu tzaru oisam mitfos. Even if the balabas has some sort of pre-cut form, mold, and they know how to make it quick like a baker, don't do it, because others won't know that you're using a form. And to make the same type of loaf, they're going to have to follow the real process, which is to do it and to leave and let it rest, and it will become chametz. Halacha 16, The water that's used to clean the hands, to clean the trough after the kneading, water that you're using during the kneading, that water should be poured out, and it should be poured out on a midrain, on a inclined location. In other words, on a slope. For the water not to stay gathered, because there is flour, there is dough in there, and if you let it sit, it will become chametz. Halacha 17, don't soak bran in water prior to feeding it to the chickens, because it might become chametz prior to the chickens eating it up. Aval, what could you do? You are allowed to broil the bran. But we just learned before, when you broil something, you stop the process of becoming chametz. And even though we learned before that when it comes to human consumption, don't do it because it might not properly broil air for chickens. And the minig is not even to do that for chickens, because the water might not be, because the bran might not get thoroughly broiled. And like we learned in this chapter, then it will become chametz. Halacha 18. One is allowed to prepare bran, flour, for chickens in water, if you give it to them right away, or putting it in front of these chickens, and you're standing there and you're making sure that all of it will be consumed prior to the time that we mentioned above, which is the time that it takes for that mixture to become chametz, which is kedei hiluch mil. 1 second. What's the ma'ilagis? It's only going to become chametz if the chickens let it sit for that amount of time without pecking on it. Because for chol zman she'ein menakrim boy, as long as the chickens are pecking at this, then if you're there and you're turning it over, then ein machmetz even beyond that time. And when they finish eating, you should make sure to pour it all out in a slopey area. And that's why it's allowed, because you're supervising it and you're being there knowing what may not happen will make sure it never becomes chametz. Halacha 19. A woman should not soak bran that she's taking with her to the bathhouse. They would use bran, I think, for shampoo. They would use bran for, I don't know for what, putting it on their skin. So you can't do it prior to going into the bathhouse. But she can take the bran itself while it's still dry and rub it on her skin. A person should not chew kernels of wheat and to put it on one's wound, which was a medicinal thing that they used to do, because they will become chametz. When people are preparing charoises, don't put flour into it. And if you put it, not only if you waited, burn it right away, because charoises is a substance that will make flour from any of the 5 grains become chametz very quick. Another rule, don't put flour into mustard, and if you put it, it becomes chametz quickly, but not that quickly. So here the solution is you can go and eat it right away. Gavaldi. Halacha 20. Person is allowed to place spices, sesame seeds, poppy seeds inside a dough that won't affect it becoming chametz. Vishemen, you can knead a dough with water and oil, or with dvash v'chalav, or with honey and with milk, or to use these substances. Lekatev bahem. Lekatev means to baste. That the layer that you put on top of a bread makes it look nice. It makes it look brown. However, the issue here is like this does not become chametz. There's another issue. The issue is that when there is the mitzvah obligation to eat matzah, which is only on the first night of the Pesach, it has to be lechem oini. Lechem oini means flour and water. Or not, or even lekatev, only water. Not because of chametz, lechem oini. And this issue was only on the first day. Uberishon, first night, or chutz la'aretz, the first 2 nights, by the Seder. But for the rest of the Pesach, it's not poor man's bread, but it's not chametz. It doesn't become chametz because you added oil, because you added milk, because you added honey. Halacha 21.
All right, that also applies to these matzahs that have fruit juice in them, correct? It's the same thing.
Yeah, fruit juice is even correct. They can never become chametz. They're not kosher for the mitzvah, but they're not chametz.
Right.
Now the final topic of this chapter, which is quite amazing. We're just going to be learning a few halachas, but in here the Rambam includes, and he teaches us the dinim of kashering utensils. Right, the general rule is that if a substance had contact with the utensil, it wasn't hot, if it didn't stay there for 24 hours or more, it wasn't pickled, if it isn't sharp, take off that substance and the utensil doesn't have any of it in it. But if it was boiled in it, or if it was liquid and it sat in it for 24 hours or more, or if it's very spicy, aside of the food itself that you have to remove if the food is problematic, some of the taste of the food permeated the utensil. And when it's going to be reused, some of that taste can go out. So you have to basically purge it prior to using it on Pesach if that which it absorbed was chametz. That's the general rule. How do you purge it? If it got absorbed because of hot boiling water, it gets purged with hot boiling water. If it got absorbed because of fire, then it gets purged with fire, as we'll see over here. And some utensils can never fully be purged, so therefore they can never be kosher. As we'll learn. Halacha 21. Kol klei cheres, any earthenware utensil. Shemeshtamish v'em chametz b'tzoinen, that you use chametz, but only cold. I'm saying cold b'chlal is not a problem. Clean out the chametz and you're good. You can put matzah in it if everything is cold. Chutz mikli, aside of a utensil, that they put the leavening agent so'ir in it, or ukli that they put charoises, because over there, because the leavening effect is very powerful and it's sharp and it goes in even though it's cold. The chein arevos, troughs that are used to knead chametz the whole year. And you always leave chametz in it, even though it's cold and dry. Those troughs also absorb some tam of the chametz. And they may not be used on Pesach. Next rule, halacha chav. Bib shel cheres, an earthenware roasting pan. She'oifen olav chametz that is used to bake on it loaves of chametz the whole year. Ein oifen olav matzah b'Pesach. But if you filled it up with coals, even though it's made out of earthenware, and you burn the place upon which chametz sat on, mutar lavashal olav matzah. Halacha, we're so more machmer today, but here you see how it is. Halacha chav gimel. Clay matcha, now any utensil made out of metals, any metal. Clay avanim, earthen, stone utensils. Shenashtam shvem chametz that was used. Even beroischin b'kleidishain, with boiling hot water in a kleidishain, like kederis pots, the ilfasin stew pots, they have to be kashered through what we call hagala. Hagala means it has to be submerged fully in boiling hot water. Put it in a larger kettle, and have water go over it. And it should boil in that water, that it is in it completely submerged. Then you rinse it out with cold water. That's what we do after it boils. You take it out, you rinse it with cold water, and then you can use it for matz. And if you have a knife, you can take both the blade and the handle. You submerge it, boil it, rinse it with cold water, and you can use it for matzah. Halacha 424, clay matros, or metal utensils, or stone utensils, or clay eitzim, wooden utensils, that was used to chametz, but never directly chametz clay dishon, only clay sheni, like a plate, like a cup. Here, you don't even have to have it boiled in hot water. You have to have boiling hot water poured on it. Because you don't have to have it submerged and boiled in. You just have to pour hot water on it, boiling water on it, even though when you pour it, right away it loses the bubbles. It doesn't matter. And you should leave it in that water, even though it's not bubbling in it, until all of what it absorbed, which is the chametz, gets released, gets purged. Then rinse it in cold water and then use it. Halacha 25. Any earthenware utensil that had chametz used in it with heat, aside of the one that we mentioned before, that you baked it and you put coals on it, whether it's the first utensil like pots, like plates, whether they were glazed and covered with avar, with lead, which makes it look a little bit like glass, Whether it's earthenware utensils that are not glazed at all, they may not be used for matzah, because a earthenware utensil cannot fully be purged. Use it for after Pesach. You have to put it away for Pesach. And the final halacha chavav, final of this chapter, klei rishon, if you want to boil a pot, but again, boiling it means that it's completely submerged in water. What happens if I have a large pot, but I don't have a larger pot into which to put it? So people say, I'll just fill it up with water and boil it. That's not enough, because it's not submerged in. But there's a solution. You know what you do is you take clay mortar and you put it around the rim, meaning that when you fill it up with water, the water is able to go above the rim, because there's some new rim that's temporary that's going to hold the water within there. That's good. And now you boil it. And that's good enough. Then you rinse it out with cold water. And you can use it for matzah. You can use it on Pesach.
Rabbi, he doesn't mention anything about glass as clay rishon or clay sheni.
I love it. Beautiful. Thank you. So here, one of the many examples where we have a big difference between Sfardim and Ashkenazim. And it's from one extreme to the other, Kevan. The Sfardim hold that glass does not absorb, which is why Sfardim in their kitchens will have a glass utensil both for meat and for milk. Ashkenazim hold not only does it absorb, but like earthenware, you can never fully purge it. And we are specifically machmer on Pesach, specifically. Even though during the year, some people say, make Haggalah 3 times, not on Pesach. And there's a famous story of the Alter Rebbe, who was by his Rebbe, at a time in his life that he was very poor. In those days, even when you went to yeshiva, the yeshiva didn't give you eating utensils. If they gave you food, you brought your own eating utensils. And the Alter Rebbe, he brought his own glass. He can only afford one glass, and it was a glass utensil, and he was going to use it for the 4 cups. Now, make no mistake, glass itself is not used for chametz. But since during the year you use it on the table, we have chametz. We're speaking about a chumrah on top of a chumrah. So he was planning to use it on the seder. He didn't have an option, and you can rely on the Bet Yosef. You can rely on him. The Maggid is about to open up the seder, and he doesn't begin. And the Maggid says that Ramah is standing here, who passed away many years, and he's telling me that someone here has chametz. The Maggid stood up and he walked around the table and he pointed out to the Rebbe, "You're guilty." Oh my God! And the Alter Rebbe says, "Exactly, you're right. Here's my cup." According to the Ramah, the Maggid told the Alter Rebbe, "Don't worry, you'll drink out of the same cup," and they shared their cup. How beautiful!
Wow.
All right, Baita. Perfect timing. Today's second chapter, and we got to really go jogging over here. Perek Shishi is now about eating matzah. So we learned about the zman, about the prep, about bir chametz, about bittul chametz, about how does something become chametz, all the negative. After getting rid of all of the negative, it's not just enough to get rid of the negative, because then what benefit do you have? I lived my life and I just didn't do bad. No, you got to do good. Got to eat matzah. So this chapter is about eating matzah. This chapter has 12 halachas, and let us start with halacha aleph. Yep, you got to pay the shishi chometz matzah. Mitzvahs say min ha'torah. There's an obligation from God to eat matzah on the night of the 15th. Shneimar, as it says, bo erev, in the evening you should eat matzahs, and that obligation is b'chol makom, no matter where you live, even in L.A., even in Miami. B'chol zman, meaning whether the temple is standing, whether the temple is not yet rebuilt, no matter when. The mitzvah of eating matzah is not connected to eating Pesach. If it comes to maror, we'll see in a moment. Biblically, maror has to be eaten with the korban Pesach. Biblically, when you don't have a korban Pesach, midoiraisa, you don't have to eat maror. We eat now midrabanan, but matzah, even midoiraisa, you're mechuyev even without a korban Pesach. Elazu mitzvah b'fnei atzma. When umitzvasa kol alayim. During the rest of the Yom Tov, achilas matzah is rishus. It's optional. Ratza oichol matzah. Ratza, if you want, you can eat rice, you can eat doichan millet, you can eat kloyos, roasted seeds or grains, or peiros or fruits. It's quite amazing that the only thing that Rambam doesn't mention is vegetables. It's a whole different culture. Today, what would people? People eat vegetables. You go to Shiloh's and you pay $100 and you get 5 leaves. 5. Halacha 2. What happens if bala matzah, if you swallow matzah, guys, you know what it means swallowing matzah? It means you don't chew it, didn't chew it, yatza. Bala marar, yatza. But if you swallowed matzah and matzah together without chewing it, now you only fulfilled the obligation of matzah, but you did not fulfill nowadays the rabbinic obligation or then the biblical obligation of matzah. Why? Because since matzah is considered tefillah l'matzah, why is matzah tefillah l'matzah yakir? Nowadays, like we already spoke out, because matzah bismana says only midrabanan. So if you're not chewing it and you're having 2 mitzvahs, then the drabanan one becomes insignificant. So you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. Now, why are you yoitza matzah even though you didn't chew it? Because the matzah went down your beis habliyah. But what happens if prior to swallowing it, karachan besiv, you wrapped it in a fiber, today you put it in a capsule, that's not called eating. Bechlal. Ubalan af matzah leyotz. Halacha gimel. Achal matzah b'loy kavana. Guys, I want you to know, b'loy kavana means that you knew you're eating matzah. You're eating matzah. You did not have kavana to fulfill the mitzvah. What does it mean you're eating matzah, you don't have the kavana? A yid didn't want to eat matzah. That's because of galus. He doesn't know, doesn't care. He's angry. And a guy forced him to eat it. Shared a story over Pesach with Rabbi Yoel Khan's father, Rabbi Fall Khan. Oh, he had Mesiras Nefesh Mamish to get matzah when he was in the gulags with the evil communists. And together with him, there was a Jew that was an atheist. When the goyim saw how much Mesiras Nefesh the Fall Khan had to get the matzah, they told that guy, they told that yid that wasn't then observant, if you won't eat matzah, we're going to kill you. So the Fall says he was going to give his life for the mitzvah. Mamash Mesiras Nefesh, Kabbalistic stories. He says the other yid only ate matzah not to lose his life. But we have the same exact mitzvah. Because God, in other words, you eat matzah without kavanah. Like goyim forced you to eat it. You're yoitza. But one thing, if a person, one of the states in which a person has a din of a shoita is while a person is having an epileptic seizure. At that moment, the person has a din of a shoita. Now, a shoita is exempt from mitzvahs. So the Rambam is saying a gavaldic thing. If while a person has such a seizure, they eat a kazayas, that means they ate it at a time that they were not obligated. If I did something bisman that I'm not obligated, then I also did not fulfill my obligation. Then the seizure went away, I have to eat it. Then he gets healed. That's worse than no kavanah. But no kavanah means I'm a sane person. I know what I'm doing. I'm obligated. And I made a choice not to do it, but an outside force forced me. Then you're yoitza. But at lefisha oisa achila oisa b'shash oisa potem mikol hamitzvos. Halacha dal. By the way, the same is with everything else. That means if someone is during a epileptic seizure, they put on tefillin. Also the same thing. Then they have to put it on again. Halacha dal. Ein adam yoitzi yedei chayvis achilas matzah ela im achala me'echad mechameshas haminim. Why? Because since it says loy yeyachel chametz, and in that context, it's not juxtaposed mamash, but in that area, in Parshas Boy, it says toichlo matzahs. Chazal learned devarim haboy l'dei chimutz. If you ate them prior to them becoming chametz, then you're yoitza. But shara devarim, like rice, like millet, like any of the kitniyos legumes, ain't bahen matzah. However, if you make a dough, a mixture of wheat and rice, another rule, isas kalavim, those that are made to feed dogs, if the shepherds of the dogs also eat from it, that means it's b'diavad, human food. But if it's so not tasty for humans, that ain't haroim mimenu, ain't yotzeba. Because why? It was not watched for eating matzah because it's not eaten at all by people. Matzah if it was needed in fruit juice. So yatsa by yedei chavasi b'Pesach. Now this is a very big thing that we have to learn because we did learn in the previous chapter the klal that peidos will never make something become chametz And we learned over here that if you make it out of oires, you're not yoitz at all. Why? Because devarim haboim l'dei chimutz. So you would think that if you needed wheat or barley or the other of the five with meiperos, since it can never become chametz, you cannot be yoitz in the mitzvah. The Rambam says that's not the case, because the flour can become chametz. It is considered something that can become chametz. And we learned in the previous chapter that if you use meiperos and you add 1 drop of water, then everything will become chametz. But what can you not use for the mitzvah? Something that makes it rich, which would be wine or oil or honey or milk, because of something else. It's not chametz, but it's not lachamoini. Lachamoini means poor man's bread. Now the imlosh for achal yotze dechavase. Another thing. Not matzah that was made from thin bran, or matzah that was made from thick bran. These the foods today that will be considered very, very, very healthy. It's like it's not a whole grain. A whole grain is you have both the good and the bad. Only the bad. You're not yoitze. But if you're making it whole grain, that means you're using the kemach. You have the flour from the kernel, but you didn't remove the husks. You didn't remove the thin husk. You didn't remove the mursan, the thick husk. I'm sorry, the subin is the thick, mursani is the thin. So if you have a 5 grain or 7 grain, whatever they call it, a whole grain, you're good.
Sorry, Rabbi, why is bran not good? What's the reason?
Well, I guess only that means imagine if you only remove the husk, kevan, and you don't have any of the kernel in the flour. That's not called that's not a product from the 5 grains. Now, what happens if you really, really, really refine it? Now, the only people that had the ability to do that were people that were very wealthy. The more you take out the klipa, the better it is halachically. But lachamoini, maybe it's not lachamoini, because poor people don't remove all of the bread. They want to have more. And it's still mutter. And that it's not lachamoini. What becomes not lechamoili if you mix the flour with something rich? But as long as it's flour and water, you're good. Halacha 6. Echad matzah that was baked in a tanner. Matzah that was made in a roasting pot. Whether you stuck the dough in the roasting pot and then you boiled the pot, you made the pot hot, or whether first the pot was hot and then you roasted it, all different techniques of breaking bread. Even if you bake the matzah in the ground, not even in an oven. Another thing, if it wasn't fully baked, like when I make challah, in there's dough, to the point. But if when you cut it, you have strands of dough hanging, that's not called bread. Another thing, the yoitzin berakik hasharui. Rakik means a cake of matzah that was soaked in other substances. You soaked it afterwards. That's okay, as long as it didn't fully get dissolved. Avol matzah should bishla, but if you have a matzah that you cooked, now that it's cooked, it's already not matzah. Because it doesn't have a tam of pas. Halacha 7. What happens if matzah is halachically prohibited? Like if you made matzah out of tevel, God forbid, and you ate it, you're not allowed to do that. Or ma'aser ishain, that the Levi did not separate the truma, the 10% from his 10%, or stolen flour or stolen matzah, you can't fulfill your obligations. Zaklal, that's the rule. Kol shemavarchen olav birchas hamazon. And guys, we learned in Hilchos Brachos, Pedek Aleph in the beginning. Remember, ubitzeya beidech nietz Hashem. You're not allowed to. You don't make brachas on prohibited food. If you can't make a bracha, then you can't be yoitz. If you could make a birchas hamazon, yoitz v'dechavasoi. B'chol she'ein mevarchen olav birchas hamazon, eina yoitz v'dechavasoi. Halacha ches. Now, kohanim can make matzah out of challah and truma. What's the chiddush? Even though this is a matzah that only kohanim can eat. Afa pi shehi matzah she'ein ro'eh l'chol adam. V'chein yoitzim b'matzah, ma'aser she'ein b'Yerushalayim. Even though yakeda can only be eaten in Yerushalayim. Now, where we'll see something that can taka only be eaten in Yerushalayim is not good. Ma'aser she'ein is good because you can redeem ma'aser she'ein. Potentially, you can be eaten anywhere. Aval ein yoitzim b'matzah shel bikurim. Even in Yerushalayim, because bikurim can never be redeemed. That's the problem. The fact that it can only be eaten by kohanim doesn't bother me. A kohen can be yoitze with challah and truma, but it has to be something that could be eaten theoretically everywhere. The Rambam says Meiser Sheni, no Meiser Sheni, Efshe Sheyipada, the Yachal B'chol Market. And so what? Since it says B'chol Moishvoi Seichem Teichlu Matzahs, you got to appreciate this. It's not only that Hashem is saying no matter where you live, eat matzah. God is saying matzah has to be something that should be able to be eaten anywhere. Matzah haro'oya le'achal b'chol ha'meshava yisishi yatzei v'dei chavasoi. Halacha 9, chalois toida, the loaves of a toida, or the kikei nazir and the cakes of a nazir, that if they were made for you to eat by yourself, in other words, you're bringing a carbon and you bake them for yourself, which means you intended to use it for the mitzvah of the carbon. You can't fulfill the matzah with it because it says ushmartem es hamatzos, which means matzah hamishtameres le'inyan matzah bilvad hisha yoitzeba, but zu mishtameres le'inyan azeva. But if you made chalis toida or the rakikei nazir, and they were made the chalis toida 30 of the 40 are matzah. The nazir had 2 types, but they are both not chametz. If you made it to sell it, then you could be yoitzah. Because any product that you make to sell, even though you made it to sell for people who bring those korbanos, anyone who has food, the good thing about the food business is that if you don't sell it, at least I have what to eat. On the night of the Seder. Afilu nashim and avodim cotton sheyachal lechol pas mechanchen oisem b'mitzvahs umachin oisem kezayis matz choyle oizokein she'eni yachal lechol matzah. What you do is shoydin loy rakik b'mayim, take a cake of matzah and soak it in water umachin oisem. As we learned above, as long as it didn't fully dissolve, you can still be yoytze the mitzvah. No, let's do what you need to do to be able to eat it. Halacha Yudalef. By rabbinic law, my word maftin means that which you eat at the end of the meal. Like we call today the maftir, the ruchni is the last part of the Torah that's read. Dessert. Don't have dessert after what we call the eating of the Afikoim. Even if you only want to have koloyos or egoizim, you only want to have a little nash, Elo, afal pisha achol matzah, which is how we begin the meal. And then we eat machalas acheres, uperes achayotzimah, which is how we eat the meal, shulchan aruch. And then we have the kazayis matzah b'achrein, which is what we have now is the afikoyim. After that, my friend, poisik. That's it. Stop eating. Final halach of this chapter, halach yud beis. Asru chachamim lechol matzah be'erev Pesach. People jump. Our minig is not to have it 30 days before. Our minig. But al pi din, you cannot have matzah that is good for the mitzvah. You can have egg matzah. You can have matzah's lechem osher. But matzah that's good for the mitzvah may not be eaten al pi din on Erev Pesach. Kedei sheyehi heked, there to be a distinction. La'achilasa ba'erev. Umisha achal matzah b'erev Pesach, he violated the rabbinic law, for which he gets rabbinically beaten up. Makanois and makas margus. Chein osur lechol Erev Pesach. Forget about matzah. A meal. Now, Erev Shabbos, when did we learn? Normally, min ha-mincha. On Pesach, a bit earlier. B'koydem ha-mincha. Mincha is 3:30 Shal Zmaniyos. B'ma'at. Why? Kadeshi, yikonis lachilas matzah b'tayvo. Now, what you cannot have is a meal. But it doesn't mean you can't have anything. Avol, oichalu ma'at peiros, or yirakois. But even that, lo yimali kereisa mehem. V'chachamim harishoinim. Even Atzman out of Pesach, they starved themselves on out of Pesach. They ate very, very little. Doesn't mean they fasted, means they ate very little. Kedei lechol matzah b'tayvo. And v'yiu mitzvahs chadim and olive. When the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested in the whole story of Yud Beis Tammuz, so he wrote in his diary that he went on a hunger strike until when they would give him back his tefillin. And when they finally gave him back his tefillin, he was walking behind the officer. He put it on walking behind him. And what he describes is that at that time, he felt how his body needed to drink. He was on a hunger strike. And then he said to himself that if my body is thirsting for food and water, imagine how much my neshama is thirsting for tefillin. And he begins to write, Oi, tefillin. So you get yourself hungry to understand that as no matter you think your body is hungry, it is. That's how much how much your neshama is hungering for the mitzvah. Now, in contrast, Abel Bashar Arve Yomim Toivim Oichel v'Hoylech Achetechshach. Now, guys, just to remember, in Hilchos Shabbos, at the end, I think it was Perek Lamed. What did we learn over there? In the Chosyantiv Perek Vav, we learned that because of Kavod Shabbos and Yom Tov, people also don't eat a Seudah min Amin Chol Hamayla. But here, it's much more chamor. Okay. Today's final chapter, which is the 7th chapter, Perek Shvi of Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah. Now we're going to learn about the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. We have an obligation every day. Not only every day and every night. That's why we inserted in the Shema, the 3rd parsha. But the mitzvah of Sipur, that's unique to the night of the Seder. This chapter has 13 halachas, beginning with halacha al. Mitzvah sasei shel Torah lesaper, to tell the story of the Nisim and the Neflois. Shanasu lavoiseinu b'Mitzrayim b'leil chamisha aser b'Nisim. Shenemar zocher es hayom hazeh asher yitzasem b'Mitzrayim. And the Torah uses the same expression, zocher es yom HaShabbos. What do we know from zocher es yom HaShabbos? Guys, zocher in English is called to remember. Without the Torah, remember, a person can erroneously think by the das balabatim. Remember means it's a mental activity. But as the Rambam explained by Shabbos, that when God says remember, God didn't only mean remember in your brain. Remember means verbalize bidvarim, to remember it bidvarim, which is the kiddush, before the wine. The words are midoiraisa for sure. When it says remember that we left Egypt, it doesn't only mean to remember in our minds. That's it. It's to remember with our words. It doesn't say in the pasuk in Parshas Boy. Because since it says, we say this in the Haggadah, that means you're pointing at something. What are you pointing out? That's when you have the mitzvah of V'higarat Olavin. Now, the truth is, again, without the oral Torah, you would think, when you're telling your son, you have to have the matzah and the mother. No, even if you don't have a son. And furthermore, and more, and even if they don't ask questions. People listen if they ask a question. It means the real way of teaching, you wait for the person to have a question, because if you give the answer before the question, they're not going to listen to the answer. They're not going to appreciate the answer. But if they didn't ask the question, you're not off the hook. No, you have to tell them even if they didn't ask. What should you say? You have to make the judgment of what the listener is able to receive. In other words, the Chassidus speaks a lot about this. The definition of giving is only when there's someone who's receiving. If no one is receiving, it's not that you gave, but it wasn't received. You didn't give. Who determines the giving? The receiver. So, ulefidato yishala ben avim melamdoi. Ketzad. Im oya katan oy tipish then oy meloy beni. The Rambam says beni. Notice many people, if they have a son a tipish, they don't own it. They tell their wife, your son. No. Beni. Kulanu, or the wife tells the husband. Kulanu hayinu avadim. And you give it a mashal, like the shifcha. Like you have to. They should identify. They should know what. Elamao b'layla hazeh podo isanu hakadosh baruch hu v'yatzanu lecheres. V'imoya ben gadol v'chacham. Then you give more information. Then moidiyah mashe'ed olanu b'mitzrayim and v'nisan shenas olanu alidei Moshe Rabbeinu lefi dato shel ben. Now that is halacha beis mitzvah lohidiyah, even if they don't ask. But you know what? You, the adult, be smart about it. Do things to provoke their curiosity, because that is when people learn. And you should know something else, that when the child is curious, you only have a window, because if you didn't satisfy that curiosity, they'll shut it down. And good mechanichem, that's why that's a good mechanech. Like, could be my child now is curious about reading. That's the time they teach him how to read. Then he's curious about something else. You have to know, you have to measure where's the child at and give them what they want. It's like when you're eating even begashmis, the body knows. you want to eat meat, you want to eat bread. If you give what you need. So but make changes. For the children to see, and it should provoke the curiosity, and they should ask, and then what changes should you make? First change is be nice to them. Be extra nice to them. Don't make a change by depriving. Be nice by adding. But then, even though you're giving them nash, the nash then was klois vagoiz, roasted kernels and the nuts. But then normally everyone would have their own private little table. So you put the table there, you give them, let's say, the pre-appetizer, then you take the whole table away. This never happens. Whenever the table is placed, they serve the whole meal. Which is exactly what we do. Because we make kiddush, we have a bisel karpas, and then you have a whole maggid. During the Shabbos meal, no. You make kiddush, you make challah, you eat, and then you talk. Now here you talk before there's food. The choytfin matzah zemiyadz, and also grab the matzah one from the hand. That's the afikoim. The chayotze b'dvarim elu. Now, ein loy ben ishtoi shoy alto. Ein loy isha shoy alam zeh zeh. Manashtan halayla zeh. Afilu kolanu chachamim. And even if levadoi, talk to yourself. Ask yourself. Manashtan halayla zeh. Beautiful. Allah chadal. Now, when you give the answer, you have to give a long-winded answer. Even though the Rambam wrote before, if the ben is a cotton and a tippish, all you say is, you see that Eved? We were like him and God took us out. But if you want to tell a story is contrast. A story is contrast. It's not a picture, it's a film. How do you make a contrast? How do you appreciate the miracle? When you begin with the beginning, when things were bad. And the beginning is that we were of the Avodah Zarah. All of that will give us a lot more appreciation to her. So, you have to begin with the narrative by describing the Genai of our origins. And then you speak about the praise. And v'hivdilonu min hatoyim v'kervanu liyechudei. Tein maschel amidia shavoda miyinu lepada b'mitzrayim v'chol hara shigamalu u'masayim b'nisim v'nefloi shenasu lanu u'b'cheiruseinu, and with our freedom. And v'hu sheyidroish, that's why we begin from Arami Ovidovi. Achigim kol ha'parsha v'chol ha'moisiv v'marach b'drash parsha zu arezem v'shubach. Halacha, hey. Furthermore, if you didn't say the following three, right, that's Rabbi Gamliel, what chayv? So just remember, there's a machlokes what it means. Chayv, it's mashma from the Rambam. You're not yoytze the mitzvah of Sipri Yitzias Mitzrayim, because the Rambam put it in the pedic that deals with Sipri Yitzias Mitzrayim. Others understand, that if you ate the matzah, but you don't say matzah zu sha'anu echel al shumah, you did not fulfill the chayv of matzah. Well, that's not the pshat in the Rambam, because as he put it in the chapter. Call me maybe. Okay. The Elohim Pesach matzah mother Pesach Hashem shepasach hamakam al boti avisenim b'Mitzrayim. Even though Rashi writes, who remembers, Pesach means chemla, rachmanas. But here we're teaching Pesach means to jump over, to pass over. Meroidim al shem shemerenu hamitzrim as chayv esenim b'Mitzrayim. Matzah al shem shenigalu, al shem shenigalu. Matzah is the redemption. Udvarim ha'elu kulam heim l'kreim hagodom. The mitzvah of matzah, the mitzvah of mother. Because whenever the Torah gives a mitzvah, the Torah writes the words lema'an, that means that part of the mitzvah is to know the matara. Halacha chol derodoir chayiv odom laharis es atzma. A person must present himself or see himself ki ilu hu ba'atzma yotza ato mishibud Mitzrayim. Shenema va'oisonu hoitzi misham. It's not about what happened to them. It happened to me because if it wouldn't have happened to them, I would have been there. The Torah is above time. The Torah is not only talking to that generation. I have to remember that I was an Eved. And the Yotzasa L'Chedes V'Nevdeisa. And Lefika, Halacha 7, if I left, it's a whole different experience. Then I have to do actions that demonstrate I'm free. In the manner of free men, which is may save to recline that acherutz. Another than chayv lishis v'layla arba koiser shal yayin ein pachos mehen. Afilu arni hamas paras v'nat tzedakah lo yitchasu leim arba koisais. What's the minimum share of every kois at a vias of a loy? Halacha 8. Afilu arni shel Yisrael lo yorchelat sheyase. However, a woman does not have to recline because b'chlal women generally did not recline during the year. Well, now I say it was like a minute. Women b'chlal then did not recline, so they don't have to recline on Pesach. But ve'imisha chashuva, which means that she during the year reclines, then she has to recline on Pesach. Now, however, there's another nuance, and that is bein etzel aviv hashamash b'fnei rabbi. They have to recline because it's not considered disrespectful in the presence of talmud b'fnei rabbi yena meisa. Elam kei nosan le'rabbi reshus. When we're speaking about reclining, it has to be dafka on the left. The hasibas yamin eina hasiba. Another din, if you are reclining on your arpoi, arpa means on your back. If you're reclining on your face, einzu hasiba, that's not called reclining. And ve'emus aitzrichen haseva, v'shas achilas matzah, achzayis matzah, while you're drinking arba koisas elu. However, when it comes to all else, u'sha'ar achilas u'she si yasoi im heisei v'reizah shubach im lav in etzoreh.
But if you didn't incline all year, you shouldn't incline then.
So the Rambam is not saying, the Rambam is only writing that for women. The Rambam is saying that men have to recline, and that goes until nowadays that we are foreign to us, became that we recline. Halacha 9. Arba koises elu. In the days of Chazal, water was very concentrated. It needed to be mixed with water. Because if you don't drink it with water, it's not geschmack. Even though you're going to get shikid, not in a bad way, you're going to get high. But the part of the experience of wine is the geschmack, baharev, the pleasure of wine. Now, how much do you have to dilute it? Every type of wine needed another amount of water. It's about your preference. However, you're having 4 cups. We have to make sure that within the 4 cups, you're going to have, guys, 1 revius of pure wine. That's the minimum. Now, what happens if you drank the 4 cups, miyayin, but you did not dilute it? Even though you had 4 cups, but the cherus aspect was not expressed. Gavaldik. If you had 4 cups, mizugin, yakir, bababasachas, then you have freedom. But you were not yoitz in the 4 cups. You got to do it all. Another detail, when we speak about the 4 cups, if you did have 4 separate cups, but you didn't drink the whole cup each time, you are yoitz halacha yud. Now, kol kois v'kois ma'arba kois v'sa'elu is considered like a separate mitzvah. It's linked to another mitzvah, and therefore, mevarach olav brach b'fnei atzmai. Not one way to pray hagafim. We make a hagafim for each one. B'kois rishoin, it's uniquely connected to the kiddush hayon. Koi sheni, koi olav haggadah, the mitzvah of magid. Koi shlishi, you make birchas hamazon. Koi srevi, goimer olav hahalel, umavarach olav birchas hashir, which is yakir, the bracha of Yahalalucha, mamish the way we do it, as we'll see, God willing, tomorrow. If you want, you can drink more, with one exception. Only there ain't a choice. Halacha Yudal. Acharois. That's a good kasha. Halacha Yudal, and a lot of time goes on, Acharois, it's mitzvah medivri soifrim. And that is Eichel Titzraya of the Mitzrayim. How do you make charoises? It's a ganze halacha. You take tamarim dates, or groigeris, or dried figs, or tzimukam, or raisins. The chayotze behem, and the doris and oisim, you crush them, and you put in it vinegar. And umetavlim oisim mitavalim, you mix them with spices. Why? Kemoi tit betevin. Umavi oisim ala shulchan, you put it on the table. The Rambam doesn't even speak about just eating it. You wait smashma. You have it on the table. Halacha Yud Beis. Now we're moving on. It's amazing to say that. Matzah, Yakir. Midoraisa. 4 cups midrabanan. Charoises, mitzvah midrabanan. Now morer. Chilas morer, eina mitzvah men ha'toira b'fnei atzma. Elo tluyihi, it's really contingent biblically with the eating of the Pesach, the Korban Pesach. In other words, shemitzvasa say achas lecho b'sar Pesach al matzah meroidim. That's only, which means midoraisa when you don't yet have the Korban Pesach back, you don't eat morer at all. But divrei seifrim lechol ha'morer levade b'layla hazeh afilu ein sham Korban Pesach. So now let's define what morer is. Halacha Yud Gimel meroidim, this bitter herb that the Torah is speaking about, whether it is in Parshas Boy, whether it is in Parshas Baal Loischa Pesach Sheni, is either chazeres. This in English is called romaine lettuce. Kevin is going to get pictures. Ha'aloshin is endives. Tamcha is chrein. Tamcha, yakir, is horseradish. Chavina is date rue, and maror is wormwood. That's the Mishnah. Kol echad mechameshes mina yarek elu. All of them are called maror. And let's go therefore. Im achal me'echad mehem. Whether you fulfilled the mitzvah midrabanan by having a kazayis from only one, or you had all 5, and you only ate a kazayis by a fifth and a fifth and a fifth, but you ended up having a kazayis, it's equally good. Yatsa. With one thing, that they are moist. Because once they reach a certain level of dryness, it loses, it's not. However, if you're having their stems, even better, and you can be yoitz even if they're dry. The yoitz in the kelach shalom afilu yavish. You know what cannot be used even in the stems? If you processed it, which is if you're shalak and if you boiled it, or you pickled it, even if you only cooked it, then in yoitz bahem das is nishta marer. It has to be raw. Even God willing, we continue. That was great.